Everyone, please stand for the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing while our Deputy Mayor leads us in prayer.
For those of you here this evening and those of you at home, there will be a better show on TV at 7 o'clock when the Taney Dragons play in the World Series. And so in honor of that team that I think we're all rooting for, I'm going to recite the Little League pledge. I trust in God. I love my country and will respect its laws. I will play fair and strive to win. But win or lose, I will always do my best. Amen.
This is to advise that meeting notices covering this meeting have been sent and posted as required under the Open Public Meetings Act. First order of business is the approval of the requisition list, operating expenses, and payroll. Can I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
One thing, Jennifer, on here, we have the concert performance by the Bubba Mac Band.
Yes.
What concert was that?
That's a concert. The CER puts on multiple concerts during the summer, and that was one of their concerts. And the Bubba Max Band comes every year. They're very reasonable with us for the band that they are.
It's just the Bubba Mac Band.
Yeah, it's a nice concert.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, could we have roll call, please?
Simpson,
Yes.
McClay,
Yes.
McCarty,
Yes.
DeLucre,
Yes.
Palilla,
Yes.
Kern,
Yes.
Mayor Gunther,
Yes.
motion carried.
Okay, next we have public comment on agenda items only. I need to remind you that
Mayor, can we change the agenda this evening since we have the reval person here, and many of the public agenda questions might relate to that.
right, well,
It's on the agenda.
it's on the agenda, the real estate tax,
That's
as a discussion item.
That's what I mean.
Right.
So can we have George give his presentation, which may answer lots of questions prior to having the public portion?
I'm just not sure if George will know what the questions are if they aren't asked, but
Well, he can do a presentation, and then maybe we can have a question answer, like a public comment right after that. And just want to remind everyone that the Chamber's having their movie tonight on the beach, so.
okay. So we can have George from Vital do a presentation, and then what I would like to do is open up to the public for questions about the reevaluation and about taxes. Then I'll close that public portion and we'll have public comment on agenda items only. Okay, would you like to make your presentation? Thank you.
George, you need to go to the,
You have to use
go
the
the
microphone.
microphone.
Try not to turn my back on governing body. My name is George D'Angelo. I'm with Vital Communications. We're the company that performed the revaluation. Basically, the revaluation was started a couple years ago. We had to, should have been completed the prior year, but because of Sandy, it was extended for a year. The purpose of the revaluation was to set the assessments within the city of Brigantine at 100% of market value, which I believe we did achieve. The final tax book was filed. The figures were reviewed by the county tax board, and the county tax administrator certified the book. I believe the ratio of value actually came in at 98% and change of market value. I know we did have informal hearings where we did send notices to property owners. We had about an 8% response of people come into the informal hearings to discuss their assessments prior to them being finalized. We just completed the tax appeals in the city of Brigantine. I know for the last, I think for about the last 5 years, the city of Brigantine had between 1,200 and 1,500 tax appeals every year. I believe last year they had a little over 1,400 tax appeals. This year, with the revaluation going into effect, there was a total of 217 tax appeals, which is a little less than 2% of the total taxable properties in the city, which kind of indicates to me that most people felt that their assessments were a reasonable representation of the market value. At this point, if anybody has any questions regarding the revaluation, I'd be glad to answer them, either the public or council.
George, you may want to, one of the questions that I'm consistently asked by the people whose taxes went up is the impact of having done the tax appeals over a period of years and then the new rate on the new value. And I'm sure other members of council have had similar questions.
Yeah, well, basically, everything is budget driven. The excuse me, the municipality has their own budget. You have the county, you've got a regional school, district school, open space tax. So there's a lot of different components in there. And basically, all those budgets are added up and the value of the town divided into that to come up with the tax rate. And basically, the tax rate was computed on an assessment of about $4.1 billion prior to the revaluation. At the conclusion of the revaluation, we had determined the entire value of the city was about $3.1 billion. So losing that $1 billion in rateable, because the budget dollars aren't going down, the tax rate is going to have to go up to make up that difference to generate the same dollars. And I believe we did, I think, what was the tax rate last year, about $1.30?
No.
1.308. You know, we had told people informally during the hearings that based on the current year's budget, which would have been last year's budget, we thought the tax rate would probably be raised to about $1.60. So those people that did come into the informal reviews did know that the tax rate was going up. But once again, that was based on the new rateable and generating dollars for last year's budget, because that's a known amount. We don't know what the budgets for this year were going to be. So that gave them a level base of comparison at their taxes before the revaluation and after the revaluation.
George, if you, and just to cover this, because I've had these questions as well.
Sure.
People who came in for the informal meetings, or perhaps they didn't come in for the informal meetings, I should say, and did not appeal this year, the time frame for appealing would be April of next year.
That's
so
correct.
That, I think that is something that once the whole tax bill came out, the impact of the entire change is what is driving a lot of the questions.
Yeah, and once again, Mayor, years ago, the statutory date for filing tax appeals was August 15th, which was after the tax bills went out. And I believe the county boards of taxation felt that people were appealing their taxes rather than their assessment. What they have to do is appeal their assessment and prove that the value was incorrect by using comparable sales and that sort of thing. So what they did is they changed the filing date to April 1st. If you're doing a revaluation, it's extended until May 1st, but for next year it'll be April 1st. And I believe the reason they did that is to keep the focus on the tax assessment and whether that was a reasonable indication of the market value of their property rather than appealing their taxes because they thought they were paying too much in taxes. But at this point in time, anyone who is dissatisfied with their tax assessment would have to appeal their tax assessment next year, and they would have until April 1st of next year to file the appeal.
Great.
George.
Any additional questions by council members before I open it up to the public?
George, I have a few questions. Several people have approached me about the value of their land. And can you explain how the assessment was decided on the land on the island?
Yeah, basically, if we have vacant land sales, we'll take a look at those. We're focusing basically on arm's length transactions between willing buyer and willing seller, neither party being under any duress. In the absence of vacant land sales, we look at the sales of improved properties, like those properties with dwellings, and try to determine what the value of the dwelling is, and whatever value would be left over would be the residual value of the land. In other words, if the property sells for $1 million and we determine the value of the improvements are about $500,000, the residual $500,000 left over would be the value of the land.
Okay, I guess my question is, now that people have their preliminary bills and they're able to go and compare it to other assessments on the island, there's questions about their land value. Is it consistent? Has it been checked that properties all along a certain area, say the bay,
they
the
should
ocean,
be. Yeah,
should they be consistent if it's the same size property?
They should be consistent if they're the same size in the same neighborhood under the same factors.
And if it's not, what would you recommend?
If they think it's not, my suggestion would be to contact the tax assessor's office to review it, and we'll assist her with any kind of review that she needs.
Now, in the event a property is purchased with a dwelling, and then the dwelling is demolished, does that whole price of the sale then become the new land value?
Well, no, it can't be, because if you're talking about right now, no, because in New Jersey, it's spot assessing. You can't go in based on one sale and change the value of one assessment based on a sale. Like if people can, in California, the law is that way. If you come in and buy a house, they're going to change your assessment to match the purchase price of the house. Right now, all these assessments are set. So a purchase right now is not going to change your assessment. Right now, the only way an assessment can be changed is by a review by the tax assessor. If she chooses to change it before she files the final tax book for next year's taxes, or if people file a tax appeal. That's the only way the assessment can be legally changed.
George, if I could, tell me if I'm wrong about this. I think it's a point that really should be put out there so that people understand. In your firm's job of trying to evaluate these properties and to set them at market value, your goal is to get them at 100% of current market value, right?
Correct.
And as you indicated, based on the county's review, you came very close.
Yes.
98 and change. In that process, you don't give any weight to the history, if you will, of the assessments or the appeals or non-appeals of any given property. Your goal is to find the market value at that point in time, right?
Yes, we come in from scratch and we do the job and we put on the values that we think are appropriate. We don't even have any access to prior year tax appeals or prior histories on the property. We come in and value them at what we feel is appropriate. I understand some properties have been appealed in the past. Some properties have been appealed every year for 3 or 4 years. But we kind of really disregard that.
Right. So basically you came to it with a clean slate, trying to determine what was the market value of each property to get it as close to 100% as you could.
That's correct.
Right. And one other thing that I think sometimes gets a little confused, the allocation of the overall assessment for an improved property between land and the improvements, that's not really binding in any sense, right? The
No, it
assessor
isn't.
makes their best judgment.
No, in fact, there's case law in New Jersey, and it follows through the tax court and down to the county board of taxation. You can't appeal your land value. If it's an improved property, if it's got a dwelling, you can't just appeal your land value. You can't just appeal your building value. You have to appeal the total value and prove the market value of the total value. In New Jersey, actually, the assessing is considered to be an administrative function rather than a valuation function. If you had a property that was assessed at $300,000, it doesn't matter if the land is 100 and the building is 200 or vice versa. What has to be appealed is the total value, which would be the $300,000.
Yeah. One other thing just occurred to me. Again, because I've heard some people who seemed a little unclear in this. As your firm did the reval, that is entirely an independent professional undertaking by your firm, right? That's not something the council has any input into or the manager?
Absolutely. Council has no input into it. And I can say right now, nobody on council has questioned me about any specific values or any specific properties or any specific owners. We're completely independent. To be perfectly honest, I don't know who's a Republican here, who's a Democrat here. Doesn't make any difference. We
If you
come
stay a
in-
little later, stay a little later, you'll find out.
No, we are independent, and we try to do a fair value, and that reflects on us. And that's why I was really gratified when we had such a few amount of tax appeals, because we have to defend the tax appeals this year. We have to defend the tax appeals next year. That's at no additional charge to the city. That's already in our contract. And I don't want to have to defend a value that's capricious or arbitrary or wasn't come up with on a reasonable basis. So I'm actually pretty pleased with the outcome of the job here.
George, I have a question based on a comment that you made. You said that if an individual taxpayer felt that his assessment was not right, that he could go to our tax assessor. If she were to agree with him that something wasn't right, would that adjustment be made for 2015, not 2014?
It would be made for the next tax year, not
Okay,
this tax
that
year.
was my question, because
Yes.
that is a question I'm
Yeah,
getting as
and
well.
Like I said, at this point, it's really too late for anybody to get individual relief now, because the appeal process, the filing date is passed and the appeals are over.
Thank you.
George, I have a question. Of the 217 people that appealed, obviously these people feel that their assessment was incorrect. Were any of these people contacted before actually going through the entire appeal process in order to settle with them on a lesser amount? In other words, if they appealed, I'm sure that you looked at the data, the tax assessor looked at the data. Were there any that you said, gee, this guy's right and we ought to lower it by X? And I'm asking because in years past, there were phone calls from the assessor or the attorney to some people who had appealed, saying, you know, we agree with you partially and we're willing to decrease your assessment from $400,000 to $370,000. Was that part of the process in the appeals process this year? Were any people contacted with an offer if they appealed?
Yes, they were. Yeah, we had reviewed some of the properties, myself and the assessor, and in some of the areas where we thought there was some room to make an adjustment, we contacted the property owners prior to them going to the hearing. In some cases, we were unable to get them prior to going to the hearing, but we did make an offer at the table.
Great. Can you
Once again,
get,
it's a little bit of, it's a little bit of an informal process.
can you put a value on the average appeal change? Of the 217, what was the average?
I don't know. All the judgments will be returned to the tax assessor's office by the County Board of Taxation, and I believe that'll be done, I'm going to say in about a month. I'm going to say in about 4 or 5 weeks. They will be sent to the assessor's office, and she'll be able to see what the total loss and rateable was as a result of the hearings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other members of council with questions?
Yeah, I have 2 more questions, and these questions are coming up because taxpayers have approached me, so now I'm asking on their behalf. For example, on Ocean Avenue along the ocean, if you have a land value on the ocean that's less than the land value across the street from the ocean, how do you explain that to a taxpayer?
I don't know how I'd explain that unless I saw the individual properties.
Okay.
Unless there's a great deal in variation in their size, the one on the ocean should be assessed higher. So if there's a discrepancy, that should be brought to the assessor's attention.
And would that be fixed immediately and for 2014 if there's
No.
an obvious mistake?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions by council members?
Ms. McClay, you said you had 2 questions. Do you have
Yes.
another?
The other question is similar situation. Property on the bay versus a property in the A zone. You would think that a bayfront property
I would think that the bayfront
wouldn't
property
have a
should be
higher
assessed
are
higher
the-
as well, unless there's a big variation in the size.
Okay, these are the questions, and these are the problems
And
I'm
once again,
saying.
if there's a couple isolated circumstances like that, you should get the property, encourage the property owners to contact the assessor's office with them.
And George, regarding condo properties where units are the same square footage, yet apparently in some situations there's been a pretty large divergence in the assessments.
If the buildings are, if the units are about the same size, the only thing that I could suggest would be, that would account for divergence would be either, they might be a different story height, there might be a different view factor, depending on if these are, multi-units, multi-story, that could be a
Okay.
factor in that. It should be a factor in that.
So you're saying this cannot be corrected immediately if there's a problem with the value of the land?
No,
It can.
ma'am. I don't believe it can be legally done.
This year?
For this year.
This year. There cannot be an adjustment for the next quarter.
I don't believe so, no.
Now, is that by statute or just by practice?
Pardon?
Is that by statute or by practice?
I believe it's by statute. You may want to check with the assessor's office to double check, but it's not by practice.
Thank
It will
you.
be by statute.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to open the meeting up. If anyone has a question for George, if you would, please use the microphone. You have to identify yourself for the record. George, if you want to sit down, you can use that mic. Yeah. That's it.
Jim Conti, 108 North Roosevelt. When you're assessing the property, you're using comps in the area?
Yes.
Okay, what I would like to understand is, let's take a scenario. A house has been lifted in the area. B, a house has to be lifted and hasn't been lifted yet. C, a house doesn't have to be lifted. How do you come up, okay, and they go for, and they're on the market? How do you figure this out? Because the person who lifted the house, his price should be more than the person who didn't lift it yet. And the person that don't have to lift the house, how do you come up with the figure? In other words, when you go out and assess a property, how do you know, for instance, 108 Roosevelt doesn't have to be lifted, and say 208 Roosevelt had to be lifted? Or how do you assess the property?
Yeah, as far as I know, the tax assessor's office was in pretty close contact with the building inspector's office, and I believe any properties that were deemed to be over 50% damaged by Sandy that had to be lifted, we did give them a subjective adjustment I think we reduced them by at least $25,000. And once again, I believe they don't have to be raised for 3 years. I think there's a 3-year period on that. So we did try to take that into consideration. One of the problems, and we did discuss with council before, was trying to, I know the city really wanted to get this revaluation done and eliminate tax appeals and bring the values up to 100%. I think we were pretty successful in doing that. But the situation is, since Sandy, and our values are as of October 1st of the pre-tax year. So they're October 1st as of 2013. You really had, between Sandy and that October 1st date, you really had a small window for sampling of sales. To be honest, I would have preferred to get another year extension, but that wasn't in the best interest of the municipality. I would, as an appraiser, I'm just looking for another longer period of time to get a larger sampling of sales, because the larger sampling of sales I have, the more I have to hang my hat on to determine what the fair values are. But we did try to take that into consideration.
Okay.
And be fair with people and check with the
Yes,
construction.
yeah, because that was my point. Like, if, for instance, where I live, if the guy across the street lifted his house, and I don't lift mine, I don't have to lift mine, you would sit there and say, well, his insurance is cheaper, so, you know, his price will be a lot more than, and I'm trying to figure out how that works.
And not everyone who had Sandy damage filed a report with the tax assessor's office. Where there was a report filed with the tax assessor's office, the assessor was able to look at it. For people who came into their informal hearings, even if they hadn't filed a report, if they brought in some pictures and gave us some information, we were able to make an adjustment at that time at the informal hearing. So we have tried to take all that into consideration.
Okay, great. Thanks for your help. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Any other questions for George from Vital? John?
John Pucci, 100 Sheridan Square. Could you just basically explain, I've heard some people ask about the comps that you used during your evaluation, and maybe other comps that they may have heard about but were invalid for the process, i.e. Foreclosures or quick sales, and why they were not be able to use in your process of evaluation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, typically we don't consider foreclosures or bank sales or short sales. You know, we're supposed to be using arm's length transactions. It's a willing buyer, a willing seller, neither party under any compulsion to sell. And the County Board of Taxation generally adheres to that as well, although they may give some consideration to other sales that are considered non-usable, such an estate sale, which we believe represents the low end of the market range. But a lot of times they are listed on the MLS and are exposed on the market as a typical house would, so it may reflect the value. You know, our position is that we have enough sales that are arm's length transactions, and those sales were on the market exposed to the public at the same time as the short sales and the bank sales. So any effect those short sales and bank sales had on the arm's length transactions, that's already reflected in the arm's length transactions. So that's why we utilize those. Typically, that's what the County Board of Taxation will do as well, although they may put some weight on some of the non-usable sales.
Anyone else from the public on the reeval? Yes, Jim.
Joe Haran, 801 Bayshore. I'm curious, what percentage of properties got a reduction in assessments?
Got a reduction in assessment, you mean as a result of the
Reduction.
revaluation?
Well,
You mean a reduction in their assessment you mean their assessment before the revaluation
Yeah.
and after the revaluation? I'm not really sure, but I believe it was substantial amount of properties. Looks like almost, and I'm not sure how current this is, I would say almost 8,000.
how many?
Almost 8,000,
8,000
yeah.
properties got a
Yeah,
reduction?
and there's a total of about 8,900 that are taxable.
Now, I'm curious because I got a minor reduction in my assessment and a 27% increase in my taxes. How'd that happen?
Well, once again, a revaluation is really revenue neutral. We're just coming up with what we feel is the market value of the properties. Everything else is budgetary. In other words, if you have to generate dollars, if the assessments are cut in half, you have to double the tax rate to generate the
I
same
understand
dollar.
that, but I'm assuming from the number you just told me, 8,000 people got a reduction. That must have been pretty substantial to have other people get 27 and 30% increases in taxes.
Well, they all got, of those that got reductions, some might have been a minor reduction like your own, and some might have been a much larger reduction. It's dependent on what the old assessments were. And once again, this was a town that was a little bit on a difficult basis to value, because typically assessments are pretty uniform throughout the municipality. And if we go into a municipality that hasn't been revalued in maybe 15 years, you know, in general, we can say, oh, these assessments are going to go up 50%, or they're going to go up 60% as a generality. In Brigantine, there's been so many appeals filed over so many years, so many multiple appeals filed on so many properties, there is actually almost no rhyme or reason to some of the assessments.
Well,
So,
I
once
appealed
again-
the assessment with you people, and I gave comps that justified a more substantial reduction.
Was
And
this
you
at,
people arbitrarily said, we're happy with the number we have. You know? So there's no place to
well,
adjudicate
you know,
that.
unfortunately, that was our opinion of value. I don't know if you filed an appeal to the county board or not.
Well, you give people the opportunity to appeal, but then you say to them, we're happy with what we come up with.
And sometimes
So who do
we
you go
are.
to then?
And sometimes we are. Just
Then we have to
because
go to
some
the
people
state then.
appeal doesn't mean they're going to get a reduction.
Uh,
We try to do what's reasonable and fair.
Thank you, Joe. Mrs. Phillips?
Ann H. Phillips, 308 27th Street. That gentleman asked, I believe, percentage of the properties which received a reduction in their assessment. And you said 8,000?
About 8,000.
We only have 8,000 in some properties, don't we?
You've got 8,894 taxable properties.
And you're saying 8,000 got a reduction in their assessments, in their taxes?
No, I said they got a reduction in their assessment. The assessment is not the tax.
No, I understand that,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to know, and how about the taxes? Do you know how, maybe I should ask the council, because this has been asked of me, what, in general, I know it's not precise, but there is, people say 1/3 went up, so 1/3 remained the same, blah, 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 but are those correct or approximate in terms of what happened based on this revow? The
We
people
haven't
who-
seen the aggregate numbers that I have, and I just have looked at like you did, the anecdotal,
Yeah.
and it depends on the property. I've talked to a number of people. It depends on a number of factors that have occurred either recently or if it's been over a series of years that people have done multiple tax appeals. And, you know, the problem you run into is twofold. One is the, you know, we lost a little over $1 billion in rateables, so obviously a lot of people got reductions. With that, the number, if it's off by, the overall number was about 24% reduction in value. If your value went down more than that, you probably saw a reduction. If it didn't go down as much, you may have seen an increase.
Did the gentleman say reduction in assessments or reduction in taxes?
His assessment went down a little bit.
And his taxes went up?
It went up 27%.
And his question was, how many people actually got a reduction in their assessment? Is that correct?
That was correct.
Yes.
Okay, and you're saying that 8,000 out of 8,600 properties got a reduction in the assessment?
Yes, ma'am.
That leaves the rest of us who got
And I don't
an
know whether,
increase.
and maybe Dana knows the answer, or Jennifer, how many people actually saw a tax increase.
We don't know the answer to that question. Dana had contacted the auditor, and there's no way for us really to know unless we go through our database. But what you said is correct. Unless people were seeing a decrease in their assessed value of at least 24%, their taxes are going to remain the same or go up. It would have to be a reduction over 24% in assessed valuation for anyone to see a tax decrease.
Okay, so wait a minute, you're saying that 8,000 properties saw a reduction in their assessments?
That's what
Out of
George said.
8,600, whatever.
Right.
That's a tremendous number. I mean, a few of us got increases. We're in the definite minority here in terms of increase in assessments.
Well, as
And
we
of course
said,
then,
a lot of the assessments went down, but like the gentleman who spoke before you, if his assessment only went down a little bit, his taxes would still go up.
yeah, I'm not,
That's the difference
yeah.
between the assessment, talking about reducing assessment and reducing taxes.
I'm just amazed that so many people, so many properties got a reduction in the assessment, an overwhelming percentage. I wasn't aware of that.
Well,
So-
actually, the math is kind of simple and even kind of matches up with that 24% because the County Board of Taxation, the year before the revaluation was implemented, the County Board of Taxation had calculated that the average assessments in City of Brigantine were at 123% of market value. They were assessed in excess of
Oh, yeah, I
market
experienced
value.
that. I appealed 5 times. So, but I'm still amazed that there were so many properties that did actually get a reduction. Thank you. So that's the figure.
Dana, do you know also the abstract of rateables this year that came through? Where, are we at 100% or are we a little above that, or?
I don't have access to the abstract, but I believe we're 98 and change.
So we're right about where we should be.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Which does help us, in case people don't understand with our county taxes. When we were over that amount, Brigantine was paying more of their share towards the county taxes than other municipalities that had assessments that were too low at the time. Like,
It's because the county's got a mathematical formula to adjust up to 100%, and actually it's not a fair way. You actually pay more.
Okay, any other questions from the public? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Hi, Fred Hess, number 28 Gold Cove. My question is regarding, if I understood correctly, the fact that nothing can be changed for the current tax year.
I believe that's correct,
Okay.
yes.
I can only tell you from anecdotal experience, several years ago, there was an out-and-out mathematical error made due to the size of our property. I talked to the, at the time, city manager, who ended up conceding that there was an error, whether it was a typographical error or whatever, but the tax was adjusted for the current year because they overestimated, they overmeasured the size of the property. Are we saying that even if there's an error that's been made, not a difference of opinion, but an error that's been made, that the city would acknowledge that the resident is still responsible for paying the higher tax?
To the best of my knowledge, I believe that's the case, but you would probably be able to check with the
But
assessor's office.
I thought you just said before, though, that the tax assessor could make an adjustment in an instance like that.
The tax assessor can make an adjustment prior to the filing of the final tax book for next year. So this way, if that was the case, that would be something that could be done by the assessor's office without the property owner having to go through the time and the expense of filing a tax appeal to get it corrected. He could go through the assessor's office and have that corrected before next year's tax book is filed.
I would just encourage people to check the actual measurements of their property and make sure that due to an error, I'm not saying anybody did it on purpose, obviously, but there errors can be made, and the error could result in higher taxes for somebody. So, thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, any other questions from the public? All right, I'm going to close the public portion. Any additional questions from council members for George from Vital?
George, when you did the assessments back at that time, wasn't the tax sales or sheriff sales or short sales, wasn't that the real market though? It was probably 90.
No, we have
It was
enough-
probably 90% of the market was
No,
selling the debt.
We do have enough arm's length transactions, and that's what we utilize at the County Board of Taxation to defend the assessments. We didn't use any short sales, we didn't use any bank sales, we didn't use any
But that was the
estate
real
sales.
market at that particular time. Yeah, like it or not like it, but that was the
It
market.
has an effect on the market, but as I said, we use arm's length transactions.
I understand what you're
that were
saying.
on the market at the same point in time. So any deleterious effect that those properties being on the market at the same time, competing with the arm's length transactions, if that's pulling those values down for the arm's length transactions, that's reflected in the market because they're in the same neighborhoods at the same exposure at point in time.
Okay. George, I want to thank you for taking the time, coming over, and
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
for being
Thank you.
accessible. Any questions that, once again, that members of the public have about their assessment or how the new rate is applied? Resources are here at City Hall. Certainly you can reach out to me or to one of your council members, but we will refer you to the experts who are here in City Hall. I'll give you the information that I have, but how it's actually applied in this tax year is probably somewhat confusing as the rate has gone up significantly because the value went down. So it's something that is a little bit confusing overall, but if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Mayor, Dana just wants to give a quick announcement, just to inform people about a procedure that's available to some residents.
I left a pamphlet on the table over there. What it is, it's a program that the state offers. It's called a property tax reimbursement. There are certain qualifications for this program. However, it does freeze your taxes if you qualify. So whatever additional years, if your taxes do go up, the state will reimburse you the difference. You do have to be a New Jersey resident for the last 10 years, in your primary residence for the last 3 years, and 65 of age. So if anyone does qualify for it, you can stop in the collector's office. I do have the full pamphlets there, or if you have any additional questions or not sure if you qualify, we can go over it at that time.
And could you say something about people who are disabled?
Yes.
Would you say something about the program for the disabled, people who are disabled vis-a-vis their taxes?
As in a disabled veteran, or that's
Any
all?
yeah, any other disability.
Okay,
that
any
comes in.
disabilities, and that would go actually through the assessor's office. The assessor's office.
There's one other thing I'd like council to consider as we look at the impact of the reeval this year and the increase in the rate, and as some people are struggling to pay their taxes, especially those people who are still dealing with a lot of out-of-pocket expenses, trying to rehabilitate their homes after Sandy. I think this council ought to consider reducing the interest that is paid on delinquent taxes in this current year. I think some people are going to struggle to make that payment if they've had an increase, and there are ways to do that. The City of Atlantic City has just gone through a similar program where they have looked into reducing that interest payment on delinquent taxes, and I think it's something that we should consider here. Right now, statutorily, it's up to 18%, correct?
Yes, it is.
So, I
18
mean,
is
that's
the maximum.
18%, that's a pretty heavy lift for someone if they fall behind.
Right now, the first $1,500 is at 8%. Anything over $1,500 is at 18%. And those are the maximums that you can charge through statute.
Well, I would recommend keeping all at 8%. I mean, 18%, it's like you're dealing with a loan shark.
I believe that would have to go through ordinance.
It would have to be an ordinance, yes.
Right.
And I know a similar ordinance was just proposed or introduced in Atlantic City, dealing with the same issue. If we could ask Fred to research that and maybe come back at our next meeting with proposal. Great, and then we may want to ask the auditor to look at the impact too.
Right, and that may have an impact on our tax sales, though, also, Mayor, because when properties go to tax sale, would that affect the amount
It
of
would
interest?
affect it, yes.
Right.
With the lien holders coming out to bid on the properties at 8%.
And so if the people bidding on tax sales didn't purchase them because there wasn't enough interest, the city basically would not be able to sell those tax sales and recoup the money that is
Correct.
outstanding.
Yes.
So maybe some sort of reduction, it's certainly something the council can consider, but there may be some criteria for, who may qualify for.
Well, some
As you
kind
know-
of decent interest rate
Well, as you know,
for a
that-
return on their investment, too.
But on the tax sales, as you know, many times they're bid down to zero in the first
To
year.
premiums, yes.
Right, and then the investor reaps the interest in the second year. So, I mean, we can look at the impact of that, but even if they get an 8% return, aren't many places right now you're getting an 8% return on your investment.
Right.
All right, thanks, Dana. Go enjoy your movie.
Enjoy the movie.
Yeah.
What is the movie?
Frozen.
Oh, Frozen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just one other thing, we have Joel Fleischman here, and we pay him by the hour, so is it okay if...
What time did you get here, Joe?
Attorneys, it's always tough on you guys. Let's move to, I guess, the bond ordinance.
Yeah, just in case anyone has any questions for Joel.
All right. Okay, so that would be ordinance number 13. We'll go to 7 and we'll come back to 6. Because 6 has a public hearing, so. Let's introduce ordinance number, or have the motion in second. It's a bond ordinance authorizing the issuance of up to $12,030,000 aggregate principal amount, general obligation bonds or notes for the construction of certain water, clean water and drinking water projects within the city of Brigantine. That may be a little confusing because a lot of it deals with drainage and flood mitigation projects, although there are well projects in here as indicated in the ordinance. So if we have a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, with that said, this is going to be a two-part discussion at least. We're going to ask, first of all, our city engineer to explain the projects that are part of this bond ordinance, and then we'll ask our bond counsel to talk a little bit about the financing, and maybe it'll be a three-part because we're going to need the financial analysis from our city manager as well. Ed?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a bond ordinance that will fund the NJEIT projects that we have submitted. If you recall, we came up with about 8 projects that were submitted for New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust funding with the Sandy caveat, I think, of about 18% grant for eligible projects. In the NJEIT review, they took our 8 projects and they combined them differently. So they combined them into generators. There's 2 projects. So I'll go through the ordinance. If you look on the first page under section 1, paragraph A talks about generators for the police and fire, for City Hall, and for our storm sewer pump stations and our sanitary sewer pump stations. If you skip to page 2 and go to paragraph F, that paragraph funds generators for our water and sewer, water facilities. So NJEIT separates between potable water projects and clean water projects, which are sanitary or storm sewer. So paragraphs A and F deal with the generators that we've identified as needs in our municipality. Paragraph number B talks about storm sewer improvements. These are the improvements that will construct new pump stations at Hackney Place, Jenkins Parkway, 34th Street, the boat ramp, and along with storm drain improvements at 12th Street North, Ocean Drive West, and various, and storm sewer improvements. So the pump stations plus the storm sewer drainage piping at those locations. Paragraph C is the dredging or the removal of the accumulated sediment at our golf course lakes. Paragraph D is for bulkheads at 8 municipal street ends. And paragraph E is for the replacement of well number 4. That's also a potable drinking project. That is well number 4 at 42nd Street and Bayshore Avenue. It's a replacement of that well with a new well at the same site. So they're the projects, but they essentially, this bond authorizes or funds all of our NJEIT projects.
And Ed, the breakdown of how that is, the financing of that piece, how that works with NJEIT?
So as I understand it, and I'm sure Joel can help me out, there's, I believe, an 18% debt forgiveness, so a grant of 18%, and then a portion, 50% is zero interest, and then the other portion is current rate, market rate. So I think you end up with 18% grant and a very low interest on the balance.
Great.
It's actually better than that because Ed is right, it's 18% principal forgiveness anticipated, that's a grant. Then it's 75% interest-free versus 50, I believe. So I think it's even better.
So a question, the amount.
We won't even, we won't know, I don't know, are you finished, Because I don't want to take away.
I'm finished unless there's any other questions.
Because there's two sides to the NJEIT financing process. There's two sides. There's two sides to the NJEIT financing process. There's the engineering side that Ed is handling with Jim Rotala, I guess the environmental consultant for the city. And they process the applications and they work through the DEP and the trust, basically working through DEP to get certification of the projects. Because none of the projects can be financed until they're certified by DEP. So you know, this whole process started last October of 2013 when the call went out from DEP and the trust saying, we want to help towns that were impacted by Hurricane Sandy. We want to fast track projects, and we're anticipating 18% principal forgiveness on these projects. So it made it very attractive. Then the balance is interest-free for, on the 75%, and then that little balance has the market rate, okay? So it was wonderful. The city jumped on that, the engineer jumped on that, and there's a lot of projects here. But they're winding their way through now for final DEP certification. The legal side, and that's why I'm here tonight and to talk to you, is that now that the city is getting close to getting their DEP certification on some or all of the projects. It's now time to address the legal requirements so that we're ready to go when the DEP says, okay, you're authorized to advertise these projects to go out to bid. You want to be in a position to then fund these projects. So the bond ordinance gives you authorization or appropriation of the funds necessary to fund these projects. And these numbers that you see here are not, I just want you to be clear, these numbers are not exactly what the project estimates were in the letters of intent filed with the DEP and the trust. I had to add on some things that are permitted to be added on by the trust that they're allowed to finance, but it's close. In other words, what we don't want to have happen is if for some reason a project estimate was too low and we only got, let's say, 2.3 million for the emergency generators, but it came out at 2.5, now we got to come back, we got to amend the ordinance, we got to go back and do an additional loan. It's a lot of needless work and cost to the city. So there's a little bit of room in here to cover in the event that an estimate was too low or an estimates were too low. So there's a little bit of room. I just wanted to, put that in the ordinance. But the ordinance does address what Ed said, all the various projects that are pending now before the DEP. Part of the legal process is once, assuming the ordinance is adopted 2 weeks from tonight, we also have to go before the local finance board. All NJEIT projects have to go before the local finance board for approval. It's a rather rubber stamp process, typically goes on the consent agenda. No appearance is necessary either by council or any representatives of the city, but we do have to file that application. I'm in the process of working on that now because from what I've been told, I think Ed mentioned to me and Jim Rotala, was that the city would like to proceed with interim financing, again, assuming we get the DEP certification, we get the legal side in, lined up, and then we can go get interim financing so that hopefully we can get that in November. I'll just back up a little bit, I'm jumping ahead to November. But assuming the ordinance is adopted in September, we'll have the local finance board applications filed very shortly thereafter, if not before. Will be heard at the October LFB meeting, the local finance board meeting. So we'll be in a position to really go forward with interim financing in November of 2014 for those projects that are certified and that the city wants to move forward on. And I think there were 3 projects that that Jim was pointing out the city did want to consider interim financing on. That was the emergency generators at all the municipal facilities that Ed mentioned. I think that's item A in the ordinance. The stormwater pump stations at Hackney, Jenkins Parkway, and 34th Street, and some of the other flood control projects, that's item B in your ordinance. And then item E, which is the replacement of well number 9, or the installation of well number 9, that's another one. So those 3 projects. So on tonight's agenda
Can I just jump in? I spoke to Jim Rotella today and asked him also about the work we wanted to do on the stormwater work we wanted to do on East Evans, and he said he believed we did not need to have any DEP permits for that, and that would be something we could fast-track as well. The reason we're talking about that is because the pumps on Jenkins ties into that project to reduce the flooding in that area.
We have a cost on that? On East 7?
Not with me, Mayor. It's combined as part of paragraph B, so it's
Okay, so
included.
it's actually part of
It's
that?
included under
Okay.
paragraph B. What
Ed,
we're,
when it's detailed out on Jim Rotella's sheet, I think I'll email it to you with the different projects. He has that project as $646,000.
that sounds about right.
Okay.
So as we're going through the process for the environmental permitting, that's where we are right now. The environmental applications have been submitted. DEP and the NJEIT are doing their review, and we are hopeful that we will receive our environmental permits right about the same time as we get the approval from the local finance board, and we're ready to go for the interim financing. In the event that 1 or 2 projects do not receive the environmental permitting in time, they would be, you know, they would move towards, I think it's March is March of 2015, which would be the normal financing. So we're looking at, we're going to pursue interim financing, or our recommendation is to pursue interim financing for any project that can be certified by the DEP in time for November for us to receive the interim financing. And my recommendation for sure is the replacement for well number 4, which is well number 9. The generators, because I believe we are very close to having both of those projects certified. And on the storm sewer projects, we are very close to having some of those storm sewer projects certified. The storm sewer pump stations at Jenkins, at Hackney, at 34th Street are very close to being certified. Unfortunately, the dredging or the removal of the accumulated sediment at the golf course lakes may not be ready by November. The permitting may take longer, and that would be a project that then would be scheduled to be funded in March.
Is the 12th Street North pump included in that, in the other
So
pumps?
The 12th Street North, the replacement of the pumps and storm sewer replacement on Evans Boulevard is in the permitting process right now. If that was a little slow getting out of the gate in terms of having the permits submitted to the DEP. They were submitted later than the other projects. So that's why I mentioned the other projects are very close to receiving that certification. So I feel pretty confident that we'll be able to move to interim financing for those pump stations. The Evans Boulevard drainage project and the replacement of the pumps and controls at that pump station require very little in terms of environmental review. So in that respect, I am hopeful that we will have those permits in time for November.
Great. Okay. Joel, anything else on the legal side?
Just so that, two things I think that are on the agenda tonight are the 2 resolutions, and I don't know whether you want me to speak to those now, Mayor, or wait till they come up.
You may as well talk to them about them now while
The
you're
only
here.
reason, they're simple. Basically, they're authorizing resolutions for the clean water projects and another one for the drinking water projects to authorize the filing of the application with the local finance board. In the future, should we be moving forward with the interim financing, let's say in October, I'll have to prepare for you a resolutions authorizing those interim loans, but that's something for another day.
Okay. Jennifer, the other question that I have, and I'm sure other members of council have, is although these all are worthwhile projects and have to be done,
Right.
we're looking at bonding $12 million and then getting a reimbursement of about close to $2 million back. So $10 million, a little over $10 million added to our net debt. What is the impact on next year's budget, and how is that amortized out, over time?
Well, I don't have the impact of, next year's budget right in front of me, but when the auditor did assess this, and as you probably recall when he's talking about our budget, our debt itself is very low. He doesn't have any problem on us taking this, have minimal effect. Do you know the time period of these projects, how long they're bonded for?
20 years.
20 years. So it had minimal effect as far as the budget goes for next year. However, if there's projects that council as a whole think are more important than other projects, we could modify the bond ordinance. However, if we think we're going forward with all these projects, it's best just to do it in the one bond ordinance. We get the better interest rate. It's less costly to the city as a whole.
But is that something you could have the auditor prepare? A statement basically looking at with the $10 million of debt, what does that mean in terms of payments over the life of the loan and how that impacts us going forward? I'm sure he can do it. He has he might even have the slide all ready to go. He just has to plug the numbers in.
Except that we may not complete all these projects in one calendar year. So that's kind of like a moving
I know how
target.
much the payment is.
Mr. Mayor,
Basically, want to know what you know, we're buying a house here. We want
Yeah,
to know how much space.
what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
Right. Mr. Mayor, I think I can, and members of council, I can help out with that, with the auditor. I have information already that I've gotten from Public Financial Management, which is the financial advisor to the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust. They're charged with the responsibility of putting together projected debt service schedules. I have debt service schedules prepared already from them, not that I prepared, but from them, on every project that's listed in this bond ordinance. So I simply have to email those to Mike Cicero. He could put together a proposed debt service schedule and then what the potential impact would be.
Great.
He'll have to assume an interest rate
Right.
because no one will know what the market rate is going to be in March when the bonds are sold by the trust, or April whenever they do their sale. But he could, he can make a projection on that.
So Joel, the projection is that we could be at permanent financing on this if everything went well through the trust by March?
Well, actually, it closes in May of
Okay.
2015. Yes, the answer to your question, Mayor, is yes. Just want to also add that interim financing is, what's so attractive about that is if you do want to get a shovel in the ground on some of these projects, interim financing is extended by the trust at a 0% interest rate. So that is then taken out. It's like a construction loan on a home. It's taken out with the permanent financing when the trust loan and DEP loans close in the spring of 2015.
Is that interest only on the interim?
No interest.
No interest.
There's no interest on the interim.
No, I mean, well, so there's just the...
It's free money,
Right,
basically.
exactly.
But, I mean, of course, the
But it's
professional
ended
costs, there's
on the
still
end of
those
the
costs.
contract.
But
Right.
it's interest-free money.
Okay.
I have a question, if I could, for Jennifer. Jennifer, the summary that you provided us, August 8th, the funding summary, how
Yes.
does that coordinate with the bond ordinance that we're looking at? Like-
These are they're the same projects, it's the way the bond ordinance ties them in. Some of them are combined together. I think, like Ed said, the one project that we were talking about with East Evans was combined with some of the Jenkins and Hackney pump stations in 34th Street. So they're all the same projects, it's the way that they're detailed out are different.
Okay, but the summary here and the estimated prices would be well beyond 12 million. So how many of this is talking about the August 8th summary, how
Right.
many of those items are included in the bond ordinance? I guess it's all the NJEIT items, right?
Well, if you look at the detail and this is a detail that Jim Rotella gave us, these are all the projects he's working on. You can see some of them on the sheet are pending. So there's two different things going on. They're not going to equal the dollar amount totally. As Joel said, some of the calculations were changed a little bit with his concern as the bond counsel, and some of these numbers on here are pending numbers per Jim Rotella. So they're not going to tie in exact.
Okay, but I guess my question is, are all of these projects that are listed respectively as NJEIT and then as Army Corps projects, are they all within the bond ordinance, or does the bond ordinance include only some portion of those?
I believe did you, okay, I'll let Ed answer. He has a smile on his face over there.
So it would not include an Army Corps project that's identified on Mr. Rotella's summary. And I don't have that summary in front of me, but does it have 9 NJEIT projects?
3, 4, 5, 6, 8.
8. Because remember, we originally came forward, or the committee had originally identified 9 projects. One of those was a bulkhead along from the seawall extending south, and I think a bulkhead behind 13th Street North on the bay. That was pulled from our project, so that was not applied for. So that would account for some difference. But if there's 8 projects, I believe we submitted 8 applications for NJEIT. Several of them were combined, as I said. So the storm sewer pump stations at 34th, Jenkins, and Hackney may be identified as one project on that summary. They were combined with the boat ramp improvements, which is identified as one project. They were also combined with the 12th Street North and Evans Boulevard project, and they were combined with the Ocean Drive drainage project. So all of those were combined, and they're identified as paragraph B in this bond ordinance. then the opposite is true. One project there is listed as our generators, proposed generators at municipal facilities. And in this bond ordinance, that is separated into two paragraphs, paragraph A and paragraph F, because some of those generators were for drinking water facilities and the others are for clean water facilities. Does that help get us closer?
It does. Does the ordinance include anything that is not an NJEIT project?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Also, the public should know that the projects that were selected for this trust fund was selected carefully through the Strategic Recovery Planning Committee with Ed, myself, the mayor, our grant consultant, and a lot of other people in the community, and Councilman Picardi's on that. So these were not just randomly selected, these are priority projects. They are storm mitigation hazard projects that are a priority for the infrastructure of our city. So I just want the public to know that.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Ed, the other thing, Ed, so there's no confusion, the construction of stormwater collection and management improvements throughout the golf course section and the dredging of the lake. So I want to make it clear that we're not spending $950,000 on the golf course. This is part of the drainage system for the entire golf course.
That is correct. It's a clean, again, a clean water project, which is storm sewer in this instance. And we've said before, our storm sewer system in the golf course, the residential area, runs
Yeah.
through our golf course.
It's the golf course area, not just the golf course.
Right, that's what, I want to make it clear. It's the residential areas of the golf course drainage, not just the golf course.
Correct. It actually, I'd like to think of it as, it really has nothing to do with the golf course itself, other than it is in and around the golf course. So it is the ditches, it is the lakes, it is the pipes that outfall to and from the lakes on the golf course that carry municipal stormwater from the residential properties and streets surrounding the golf course. So that is the funding for that project. And we purposely did not say dredging, because once you do that, at least for the application, it's considered may be considered an ineligible project under this funding. So we made sure we were clear that it is for the storm sewer, and it is basically maintenance of our storm sewer system. It happens to be ditches, happens to be lakes on the golf course, but that is part of our storm sewer system.
Thank you, Ed. Okay. I think we've had a motion in a second. We've had discussion. And one thing I want to do, though, is I want to go back to public comment on agenda items, and then we'll take our vote on this, because we really haven't heard from the public about anything on the agenda, and this may be something that they want to comment on as well. Yes, ma'am. If you would, please come up and use the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Mary Budinsky, 107 South 21st. And I was looking at agenda item number 9 with the stormwater management and flood control systems. Recently, or not so recently, I came before this group and asked the mayor 3 times if he would allow FEMA trailers, if he'd make phone calls to allow FEMA trailers to be here, and that was denied unilaterally 3 times. Very recently, on August the 6th, we have a big article on Nowhere Else to Go. FEMA trailer residents in New Jersey may be evicted. One of the initial FEMA rules is that you're not supposed to have a FEMA trailer in a flood zone. I was very fortunate that I did not need a trailer of any kind. There were approximately 20 people in Brigantine who had trailers, and they weren't FEMA trailers. There is a process where 84 people in New Jersey, but none in Brigantine, because of a unilateral decision of one person, could have trailers. There are today, because of the PREM program, 8 people in New Jersey who are still living in FEMA trailers. Somehow, New Jersey residents have FEMA trailers. And that FEMA is now going to evict people from their trailers unless they can pay a fee of $1,800 a month beyond the 2-year time that they're in a FEMA trailer. I'm wondering, in your planning, if you could consider in a flood zone the whole issue of people who need FEMA trailers, when they do, when they don't, write it into your grants, that there be consideration for them. Literally, one of the people here is going to have to go live in a car. A person with a disability would have to go. So I think in the interest of humanity and the people who do live here in Brigantine, there needs to be something that is within whatever it is that you write for into your flood control systems, which somewhere addresses the Brigantine residents, because somewhere 84 people in New Jersey got FEMA trailers, but they were denied people in Brigantine, and that's all I have to say. And I'd like to leave a copy of this for your minutes. It's the same version. This is blown up. This is, by the way, an Atlantic City Press article from August the 6th, 2014. So it's very recent and current information. And if I could leave that to be part of your minutes. I can't mention that here.
Thank you. Any other comment on agenda items? Mr. Pucci.
John Pucci, 100 Sheridan Square. Mayor, I just need an understanding, some of the comments that council made in the beginning as far as if a project costs $2.3 million, we need to make sure we have enough money in the bonds, and maybe we should bond for 2.5 so we wouldn't have to go back and addend it later on. What is the procedure as far as bonding what we need, but not over bonding, whereas we're going to have more payments on the bond? And if in fact there is extra monies for whatever reason, where do those monies go? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
That's a good question.
Well, we can't answer yet. We have to, everybody has to have their public comment on agenda items, and then we can answer. Anyone else? On agenda items only? Okay, I'm going to close the public portion on the agenda items. I can start, first of all, FEMA trailers were not on the agenda, but I can assure you that I unilaterally don't make decisions. We make decisions as a body in this form of government. You know, this was an issue that came up, and there are regulations on those trailers within our jurisdiction in a flood zone. And to my knowledge, we didn't have any requests from individuals who needed temporary housing in FEMA trailers. This is an issue that really is a state issue and not a local. It's actually a federal as well. But just wanted to address the FEMA trailer issue.
Can I say something about trailers? What council, mayor and council did as a body, though, is for people that were able to get trailers, we modified our ordinance to allow them to have them in the driveway while they needed to remodel their homes. So we did what we could with the trailers.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, now we had the question, anybody else want to deal with the trailers? Joel, if you would, on the financing?
Okay. It was a good question, a good couple of questions, and the answers are as follows. The reason that I increased, just so we're clear, the reason that I added, and I didn't add a significant amount, just added enough to potentially cover bids that came in a bit higher than what the project engineers contemplated as the project cost. It's not unusual to have something like that happen. By putting in enough room in the ordinance, and one of the things the trust speaks about all the time is do not under-appropriate if you can help it. Because then you have to go back and you have to amend your ordinance, and it's a process, and it slows down the whole funding process. So in order to avoid that potential, I added some room in the ordinance. But the way the trust financing actually works is DEP will certify the project, and they'll authorize you to go out on a bid. You will find out shortly thereafter what the amount of the project really is. The ultimate funding that comes through from the trust and the DEP, because it is from two different pockets, that money will not exceed what the project, there's an allowable amount. The trust will not allow an over-issuance. Now, if for some reason during the course of a project it actually comes in cheaper than what we bonded, they will adjust the amortization schedule. The way the trust works is you requisition the funds as you go through it. Unlike when we do, let's say for example, we were to go out and issue general obligation bonds of the city for $10 million. We would get that money. It would come into the general account of the city or the capital account, and it would be expended for projects. If there was money left over from the projects that we were funding, we have two options. We can either pay down debt, which generally nobody does, or we could apply it to other capital projects that the city deems worthy. So that's a different scenario. With the trust, they won't give you the money if your project is not is coming in at a lower amount than you've actually issued bonds for. And then that will be adjusted in your amortization schedule.
So this is like...
So it's more of a line of credit that you're requisitioning.
Line of credit.
So that's how you guard against what the gentleman was
But
concerned
Joel,
about.
if I recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, we did an NJEIT project once before on the tower behind us. The engineer estimate was considerably lower than the actual cost of the project. We couldn't borrow more money, and we literally had to take money that was allocated for some public works equipment and utilize it to fund that project. Correct?
Councilman, I remember the water tower project, and we did do some type of amendment there, and I thought that perhaps we did go back to NJIT for some additional funding, but I'm not 100% sure. In the interim, we may have had to use money.
Right. Wanted to make the point that you're better to be over than under, because in that particular circumstances, I think that Public Works was not able to get some equipment that was earmarked because that money had to be used. I'm pretty sure that's the way it went down.
That was a perfect example of why I did what I did.
Right. I wanted to bring that out.
And just to be clear, like a line of credit, we're only going to be paying interest on what we actually receive.
Not quite.
Ah.
Once the trust bonds are issued and the DEP bonds are issued, the interest clock starts. Now remember, the DEP loan is interest-free. Your interest clock does start whether or not you draw those funds down. But they will then ultimately adjust the amortization schedule to reflect the amount that you actually borrowed. So I think you end up, it's not like eventually it will catch up. It will get adjusted through the payment schedule. If you've overpaid in the beginning, they'll adjust it so that you're not overpaying, ultimately. But it's not exactly like a line of credit in that respect.
Joel, we've allocated cost in here. It is an aggregate amount that we're borrowing. if one comes in higher and one comes in lower, are you able to adjust within those projects or not?
Yes, we could do that. We'd have to amend the ordinance to do that. But it certainly can be done.
Okay. So we've had public comment, we've had council comments and expert input. So at this point, we need a roll call, if you would, Ann.
Simpson?
I know they're all worthy projects, and I know they all have to be done, but I don't believe at this time we should even go ahead without knowing the cost and putting the taxpayers in debt for $12 million and find out what the cost is and what the tax burden would be on the taxpayers, especially after some people have got 33% increases on their taxes. So if you had a number and we could amortization over 20 years, if that's the bond, we could make an informed decision. But at this particular time, I don't think, without numbers, we shouldn't make a decision at all. So if I have to make a decision right now, I'm going to say no.
McClay?
Joel, one quick question. 18% grant, 75%, 0%, that leaves 7% with an interest rate?
It's 20, leaves 20, yeah, I guess it would.
18 and 75 is 93%, pretty much.
With a market rate.
Yeah. So the actual interest rate would be on what portion of the bond?
That's correct. It would just be on the trust bond. The DEP fund bond is always interest-free, depending upon I don't know what that principal amount will be ultimately for each project, but the only interest you will be paying is on a portion of the trust bonds.
Okay. This is our infrastructure. These are priority projects.
But you should
Go ahead.
know that there's no guarantee. The state, when they called out for these projects, talked about the 18% principal forgiveness. I don't know that there's a guarantee. We believe that's going to happen. And you can choose not to do, if for example, they approve it without principal forgiveness, just because you've adopted the bond ordinance doesn't mean you have to proceed with the project. Does that make sense?
Yes, it
In other
does.
words, you're authorizing this appropriation here. Doesn't mean that you actually have to do it.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. These are infrastructure projects. These are priority projects. We've been through one of the biggest disasters in our lifetime, and this is money well spent, whatever cost it is to the city to prevent future flooding and do whatever we can for our infrastructure. So I'm voting yes.
I believe these are integral to public safety as well as public health. I vote yes.
Lucre?
For the reasons that Councilwoman McClay and Councilman Bacardi expressed, and also because in our very recent past, we had the experience of Hurricane Sandy, and let's not forget how many millions of dollars it cost us to clean up after that, not even counting the losses to individual properties that the city was not responsible for. These are projects that we've been talking about for quite a while. All of our professionals have fully vetted them, and they've agreed, and council has had many discussions about them. These are projects that need to be done. I think it would be reckless and irresponsible for us not to go forward with these projects when all of our professionals have been telling us that we need this to protect against future losses. So absolutely yes.
Palillo?
Yes, for the comments that were made by Councilwoman and the two council members, I'll also want to remind council that this past winter, as a body, we authorized all the engineering proposals for these projects, expending over $500,000 in engineering fees because of the value of this program and the infrastructure needs of the community. And I believe that the projects are worthy. The interest forgiveness and everything involved, and the fact that council unanimously moved forward for the engineering of these design projects, that I vote yes.
Kern?
These are not just mitigation projects, but they are also resiliency projects so that we can get back on our feet as quickly as possible with the least damage to structures and people in case of another superstorm. And so therefore I would vote yes.
Mayor Gunther?
I concur with all of the council members that these are worthwhile projects and certainly need to be done moving forward to ensure that we can be more resilient and certainly mitigate any damages from future storms. I also agree with Councilman Simpson that we need to know what the cost of this is going to be and how it's going to impact on future budgets. But this is an introduction, and I'm assuming that that information will be forthcoming and that all of council and the public will have better information on the financial side to make a decision about whether we can do all of these projects right away, or we might have to phase some of them in based on what the financial impact will be. But it is a group of projects that are necessary to be completed, and some of them have been in the pipeline for quite a while, that especially are going to impact on those areas that sustained damage during Superstorm Sandy. So I'm going to vote yes, but we also need to have that financial analysis done so all of council has that information.
Motion carried.
Okay. Next we move to, we actually had the ordinance number 12 we didn't do yet of 2014 as a public hearing and adoption, amending chapter 241-7 of the Code of City of Brigantine as it relates to recreational facilities. And this specifies what can be done on the hockey courts. Need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, at this time I'm going to open the meeting up for public comment on ordinance number 12 of 2014. Ordinance number 12 of 2014. Anybody wants to comment on that? Please step forward and state your name and address for the record. Okay, seeing no public comment on ordinance number 12. Any council discussion before we vote? Okay, seeing none, could we have roll call, please?
Simpson?
Yes.
McClay?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palilla?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next we move to item number 8, resolution 2014-157, authorizing submission of application to the local finance board for financing of various drinking water projects involving the replacement of well number 4 and the purchase and installation of new emergency generators. We have a motion second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and this was described by our bond counsel as the procedure that we need to go through. Is there any further discussion by council? Okay, seeing none, can we have roll call, please?
Simpson?
Yes.
McClay?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palilla?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, resolution 2014-158 is authorizing the submission of an application for local finance board for the financing of various improvements to stormwater management and flood control systems. Can we have a motion second, please?
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, can we have roll call, please?
Simpson?
Yes.
McClay?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palilla?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, we move to item number 10, which is resolution 2014-159, directing the undertaking of a continuing disclosure review and authorizing participation in the municipality's continuing disclosure cooperation initiative of the Division of Enforcement of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Council. We have a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Joel, I have a question about this.
Yes, sir.
Have we ever been in non-compliance with any of these securities regulations?
As I sit here tonight, I don't think I have the information to necessarily answer that question, Councilman. We've done several bond issues over the course of the last, say, 10 years, and this initiative is designed to make sure that municipalities are looking back to make sure that what they said they were going to post up on the financial markets has been posted. I can't tell you whether or not your annual audit was filed on a timely basis or that your current budget was filed on a timely basis or any other required financial data that your continuing disclosure agreements required you to post. That's the reason that we recommend that Phoenix Advisors, I think it's their proposal that's before you this evening, be hired, because they have access to all that information to make sure that if we did make a statement that wasn't exactly correct, in other words, that perhaps we weren't in compliance, even in a non-material way, and that's the sort of the next level is, if we were in non-compliance, was it material or immaterial, and whether or not we have to report that. So I just can't answer your question.
Well,
I don't have the data in front of me.
If a complaint from the SEC had been filed, who would have gotten that complaint? You as bond counsel?
This is a new initiative. This is a new initiative being undertaken by the SEC because they were finding that issuers, not just local municipalities, but authorities, states, were not posting up the information they said they were going to be posting up for the investing market. So this is sort of an initiative that says, if you take a look at this, as the resolution says, let's audit, do an audit yourself, see where you are, file what you need to file. Now I can tell you this, Councilman, when we did the last official statement for the city, which was in December of 2013, when we issued 3 series of notes. I remember we had a bond anticipation note, we had the tax appeal refunding notes, and we had a special emergency note. We also had a note for as part of one of the notes, the contractual liabilities for the pensions. When we did that, we made a statement most likely that said we are in compliance, and at that time, we probably were, because we would not have made that statement in that official statement. Phoenix Advisors was involved with the city at that time, and I'm sure, knowing their qualifications, that they were looking at that. But this audit is to make sure that not only what was said in that official statement in 2013, but what was said in the official statements preceding that was also true. And that's why this initiative was brought up by
It goes
the
back
SEC.
5 years, right? Goes back
back
5
5
years, and then it
years.
goes,
Basically, it's a
and then
5-year.
from here on, it goes forward as an ongoing process.
That's correct.
Okay, any further discussion? And Joel, is this something that all municipalities are doing at this point?
If they don't want to risk possible censure by the local finance board, have their applications delayed, if they need local finance board, yes, they are looking at this. And if they're also, I think the intelligent course is to have the outside, to appoint a dissemination agent to make sure that this is done. And part of what the SEC is saying is we want you to look at how your information is getting posted, make sure that your CFO understands what has to be done. Get the it's readily available information. This is not hidden. It's your annual financial statement, it's your budget, it's some other information about your tax rate, your collection rate, most of which is probably in your annual financial statement. So it's not very difficult. They just want to make sure that it is being done as you say you're going to do it. And hopefully that your city will be in good shape, and if it's not, we'll make sure that that it's posted properly, and if we have to report to the SEC, we'll report to the SEC. The deadline was extended from September 10th, which caused me to get in touch with Jen when I saw that it was a September 10th deadline. So listen, we better get this moving. The deadline's been moved now to December 1st of this year for at least make self-reporting to the SEC if we feel there's a need to report.
Are you recommending it, Joel? Are you recommending this
Resolution?
process?
Yes, absolutely.
Joel, I see in the packet that we have, there's a proposed compensation to Phoenix Advisors of $950, which they say is all-inclusive for up to 3 researched issues. Does that mean 3 bond issues or 3 discrete issues of research?
I think that, I don't have that again right in front of me, but I believe, Councilman, that that's to go back and look at all relevant bond issues that have to be looked at to make sure that we're in compliance. So I think it's for any applicable bond issue. not just,
Oh, the 950? Or the three, I thought, the way I read it was the three were included in the 950, and then there was a $100 or $150 charge on top of that for each bond issued.
each going forward.
I thought it was going back too. Maybe that wasn't clear. It's in their proposal, not in the statute. But it seemed reasonable when I looked at it, even though if it costs us that much, because of the fines that we would ensue if we didn't undertake the process. It's cost effective in that.
It's absolutely something we need to do, because we need to go back and see that we were in compliance for
Right.
prior years. And what was explained to me through the various municipal representatives is, in the past, the things that they're looking for now are not things that they were necessarily looking for before, even though they were required to be in compliance. A lot of these things weren't looked at. So now they're being looked at, and we don't know what happened in the past.
Right.
And as you know, Joel had said, if they find out that we're not in compliance, it would hold up future funding for us.
Okay.
It's in their proposal.
I had a discussion with Anthony Inverso from Fix Advisors when I was in Jen's office, and I'm looking at this now, and I thought that, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Jen, didn't he say because we were, as it says here, because the city's a current client, that they were gonna waive the $950 and just charge the $650?
Yeah, there's something like that in there too.
That's what,
That's,
I
Right.
thought that's what Anthony
Yeah.
said, because the city has been good to them and has hired them for our bond issues.
Well, and they have
other
all
issues.
the data on hand,
And
so
they
they
have
don't
all
have
the
to mine it.
data. So I don't think that $950 applies.
No,
I think
it
it's
doesn't,
just
but
the
I thought there was
$650.
I thought there was a fee on top of the
yeah.
$650.
Well, the $650 is actually an option.
Yeah.
Because we're a continuing client, they get us the option of hiring them on those terms.
Right, if you hire them going forward, they'll waive
Right.
the $950. In other words, this way the city has a dissemination agent, which we're authorizing by the resolution. I think the CFO can designate a dissemination agent on behalf of the city, who would then be responsible for posting this information on an annual basis to ensure compliance.
So this resolution, as it's written, appoints Phoenix as well?
it appoints
does.
Phoenix, but not at a dollar amount. And
Okay.
I think what's attached there is that their contract.
Yes, that was attached to it.
So Mayor and Council certainly can say, you know, up to 650
Yeah.
if they want as part of the
And
resolution,
it also
if you're
folds into
worried.
the best practices issue, and so what our standing before the local finance board is. So if we have to keep going to them, if we're not part of this system, we're going to be penalized.
Potentially.
Okay, any other discussion? Could we have roll call then?
Simpson?
Yes.
McClay?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palula?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, I think Joel is off the clock.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel.
Always nice to be here. Thank you.
Always welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, next is item number 11, which is authorizing an agreement with Atlantic County for the Brigantine Triangle improvements. And this is a resolution authorizing the city to enter into an agreement to accept the license from the Atlantic County, in the County of Atlantic for the Brigantine Triangle improvements. We have a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so it looks like we're going to maintain it.
We don't have much.
Any other
Oh,
issues
choice.
anyone sees with this agreement? It's similar to what we have in other areas?
I believe it is something that the county is making a priority when there's an improvement within their right-of-way that is at the desire of the municipality, as is that triangle with the fountain improvement. They want to issue a license so that the municipality is responsible for operation and maintenance of that improvement.
So the maintenance, is that vacuuming the AstroTurf or?
And dusting the dolphins.
Would the municipality be reimbursed for maintenance of the
No.
triangle? Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
But this is standard operating procedure, like the medians going down the boulevard, correct?
So the municipal maintenance aspect of it
Right.
is standard and has been the way the county handled it. The introduction of this lease or licensing agreement seems to be
No.
the new, yes.
Okay. Could we have roll call, please?
Simpson?
Yes.
McLean?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palula?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next we move to Resolution, excuse me, 2014-161, professional service contract with James Rotella, municipal planner, to complete the post-Sandy planning assistance grant. Can we have a motion and second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
What's the number on this? I
One
see it
six-
states that
161.
the services are to be contained in the professional service contract.
137.
Ed, are you aware what the up-to amount is on the planning grant?
Right off the top of my head.
I thought it was like 30,000.
I think so. We received the grant, so 30,000 sounds right. I'll check the resolution.
This is funded by, all funded by grant?
Yes.
Do we need to plug that number in? I mean, are we comfortable amending this on the fly just to say up to $30,000?
I don't have the grant number in front of me, but I think the contract would reflect that, right, Fred? It says it will be reflected, I guess, in the contract?
Yeah, there should be a contract that goes with it. Well, there has to be a contract. So, I mean, sitting here right now, we don't know what that is, and
This is a 6-month contract.
Right.
Was the 30,000 in the last contract for 6 months or for a year?
I think this is
Year.
specific to this grant and is required, I believe, in order to be reimbursed that money, we have to, it cannot
the
be an
grant.
in-house
Right.
employee, it has to be a consultant. So I believe that's what brings this to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe it is a $30,000.
So can we amend it to say that it is a, not to exceed the amount of the planning grant?
I don't know if there'd be anything that would prohibit that, sure.
Right.
You can do that.
Comfortable with that? That's the amount that we have. Okay. So we have just a minor amendment, but we need a motion and second on the amendment?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now we need a motion, we had a motion and second on the original resolutions as amended.
As amended.
Right. Could we have roll call on that, please?
Simpson?
Yes.
McLean?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palula?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes. Okay, resolution 2014-162 is authorizing the execution of a fourth amendment to the management agreement between the City of Brigantine and Meadowbrook Golf Group, Inc. We have a motion and second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, could we have roll call, please?
Simpson?
Yes.
McLean?
Yes.
McCarty?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Palula?
Yes.
Kern?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, resolution 2014-163 is award of contract for the computer and network management. We have a motion and second, please.
So moved.
Second.
never got it.
Jennifer, you want to talk about the new computer services contract?
It's not exactly new. Mainland is this same company we've been using. What we did is we put it out for quotes. Before, they would just come in, fix and repair. We added some more services so they can monitor our computers to make sure that we don't have viruses coming through and so forth like that. I think I discussed at previous meetings that we saw some problems with security in our computer system. We had another company come in to do those repairs for us. They're repaired, but moving forward, we quoted out to see if that company or Mainland, who we currently use, or another company we also got a quote from, would be the best way to go, and Mainland was the least expensive and could provide the services we need.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, could we have roll call, please?
Simpson.
Yes.
McClay.
Yes.
McCarty.
Yes.
DeLucre.
Yes.
Palula.
Yes.
Kern.
Yes.
Mayor Gunther.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next we move to our consent agenda. Resolution 2014-164 is a 4x4 permit veterans refund. 2014-165 is a farmer's market refund. Resolution 2014-166, cancellation of taxes, and that's all the way through to 168. We have the Remax Carrier Event Request. Item F, Fall Striper Derby Request, and the Green Team Fall Fest Request. We have a motion and second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Could we have roll call, please?
Simpson.
Yes.
McClay.
Yes.
McCarty.
Yes.
DeLucre.
Yes.
Palula.
Yes.
Kern.
Yes.
Mayor Gunther.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. Jennifer, anything for the manager and council discussion tonight?
No, we did that earlier with George.
Okay, very good.
Can I just add something right now? It's just to get council and mayor thinking. Someone has offered to donate a refurbished electric vehicle charger to the city. So I would like council to think about accepting this. There would be no cost to the city except for maintenance and the electrician to connect it. And what are your thoughts on this electric vehicle charger?
Is it a metered device?
No.
It's for electric cars. Avalon put one in a few years ago. People can charge their electric cars, through this city. We would have to maintain it, of course, or remove and replace it at some point.
I think it's worth looking into, and maybe, John, we could talk at a Green Team meeting and see, is there a location somewhere in the city where it would be protected and where it would get some use, and also figure out what the cost would be for an electrician to come and connect it, or maybe possibly getting that service donated.
And also maybe we can get a copy of the specifications and some pictures to see what it is.
Yes, I have the model number. I could probably get that right online and print it.
Now, Atlantic City has them in a couple of the garages, but I would assume that they're a metered device. I mean, how does someone pay for the power that they're charging their car with?
You could do it that way? You could set it up that way?
Yeah. Because, I mean, we're looking to, not to have a line of cars that are getting free fuel at the cost to the city.
Certainly worth looking into.
Okay.
Usually you get a priority parking spot too if you have an electrical vehicle.
Right. Interesting, though, in Atlantic City, they're all below the floodplain.
Okay, anything else, council?
Just a plug for Bayfest this weekend, the annual celebration put on by the local Elks Lodge. And pretty much everyone here, I'm sure, has been to Bayfest through the years, and you know that it's a really nice thing. 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all kinds of events and happenings. I haven't gone to their website myself. I assume they have a website
They do.
that you can go to. Go to the Brigantine Elks website, and you get a full rundown of what they have going on this weekend. But by all means, if you have an opportunity, you should stop down, and you'll have a good time.
One thing, too, I'd like to bring up is that Tuesday night there was a meeting sponsored by the mayor and the mayor's organization for the One-Stop Career Center, and it was put on for the people who are going to lose their jobs in the casinos. Now, one of the things that they have is a lot of computer access issues to make allow people to come in and register at the Career Center and take courses and do all sorts of testing. But there's the dearth of computers that we have up in the community center. So I'd like to ask the residents that if people have laptops or wireless capable computers that run Windows 7 or above, that they'd like to donate to the community center. It will be a big asset for these people who are losing their jobs. And hopefully we can connect them with services and jobs and training without them having to go to the mainland or to another site. So I'd ask people to think about that. And we'd appreciate any help that you can offer.
Thank you, Joe, and that was a good point you brought up that night. The library is also available for computer access if people need to access those resources. And I do want to ask Jennifer, we have a number of links that will provide individuals who may be displaced by the current round of potential casino closings, that they be posted on our website so that people can go to the one-stop link, and also Richard Stockton College, Atlantic Cape, and actually Atlantic County Institute of Technology for the adult programs to see what is available to them. There are also links to the Department of Labor and a number of other resources that are out there. So it'd be important to continue to have access to that information. And I want to thank all the people who participated in that event, and there will be others in other communities that will be advertised throughout Atlantic County. We were actually the first one that they did, so they learned a lot at our event, and I think they'll be able to take that information going forward. But there is nothing that prevents anyone from Brigantine to going to an event in Ventnor or in Atlantic City or in some of the other communities that are nearby if you did miss the one that we're having. I think Ventnor's is actually this week, and that will be advertised. So, you know, once again, I want to thank Jim Mogan and his staff for the community center access and the job that they did setting up the facility. And of course, all of our partners who came out that night did a great job presenting the information.
And along the same vein, I would ask people to consider making donations to the True Spirit Fund for the food pantry, because a monetary donation goes much further than if we bring food in actually and give it to them, because for every dollar of cash that you give them, they can turn that into what would be $5 worth of actual food purchases. And the food, it's pretty sure that the food pantry is going to be experiencing more use over the coming months. So please consider donating to the True Spirit Coalition and supporting the food pantry.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, at this point, I'm going to open up the meeting for public comment. Anyone who would like to speak on any issue concerning city government, please step forward, use the microphone, state your name and address, and please keep in mind that there's a 5-minute limit on comments, and then you will you'll hear an answer from from council within a 5-minute time frame as well. Yes, Mrs. Phillips.
Ann H. Phillips, 308 27th Street. At the last council meeting, candidates in this November's election were given an invitation to a candidates forum on October the 25th, sponsored by the Brigantine Taxpayers Association and moderated by the New Jersey League of Women Voters, an impartial professional organization trained to conduct such election events. The program will consist of open and closing statements from each candidate and questions from the audience. This is a public meeting open to all the people of Brigantine. Questions will not be pre-selected. The moderator will determine if a question is inappropriate. This is an excellent opportunity for a candidate to present their positions on the issues, to emphasize the differences between themselves and their opponents, to answer questions publicly face-to-face and to state their reasons for being a candidate. The 3 Democrat candidates have accepted the invitation, as has one of the Republican candidates, Mr. Serra. Mayor Gunther, you have said you want to come to one of our public meetings and that you would participate in a candidate's forum. Please confirm now that you do accept our invitation. Councilman Simpson, we hope you also will accept the invitation and make your case to the voters on October the 25th. Please respond now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. I thought I had responded when I...
thought too, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure. So the answer is yes?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And Councilman Simpson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you
But
very much. We have
I
all the
apologize for any
arrangements.
confusion that you may have had.
Okay, we have made the arrangements with the league, and the date is set.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Yes, John? You're right.
John Pucci, 100 Sheridan Square. I have a couple items this evening. I was a little disappointed that the information that could have been here tonight from the auditor as far as the burden on the taxpayers for this $10 million bond. I understand that it's in the process now and will be brought up during the adoption when the public hearing is. The disadvantage is the public didn't have that information, that 2 weeks to absorb it and digest it to be able to comment intelligently at the public hearing. I just feel a loss there. I think that information should have been presented at the introduction of that ordinance so we can have the 2 weeks to digest. And I ask, the question, is the auditor going to be at that meeting to present that information? Secondly, I ask that if the amount of the contracts on your resolutions on the agenda, if they can be placed on the agenda and made part of the resolution. If you put out a contract, can that resolution state, and I believe it can, the amount of the contract? And that would prohibit any guessing of how much that contract is during your vote at future meetings. So I ask, can the amounts be part of the resolution when you approve contracts? How much is that contract for? Be part of the resolution. About a month ago, I got a letter from FEMA, and it announced what Congress has done. I believe that they have authorized the continuation of subsidized flood insurance. I asked, to the extent that it be known, and I know that there was a Brigantine Strong meeting last week at the community center, but at this council meeting, can it be discussed at the extent known? The residents of Brigantine, has that subsidized flood insurance been left present and not taken away? And finally, I ask, again, to the extent known, maybe the solicitor knows, it was mentioned before about the governor signing the no smoking bill, what the time frame is. That I believe it's coming up. It might be between this meeting and the next meeting. If so, does council continue to present the ordinance that was tabled at a prior meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pucci, and I was in violation, Mrs. Phillips. You had to be seated before I could address you, so Councilman Simpson wants me to go into the penalty box, but I'll start with Mr. Pucci's question about the financial information. I think if the auditor is available, perhaps he can be here. If not, I'm sure he'll provide the information to the city manager. With respect to the amount of the contracts, I don't see any reason why that can't be part of the resolution as opposed to referring to it in the contract. That seems to make sense. I see no reason for that. With the flood insurance, as you know, Congressman Lobiondo was successful in amending the Bigger Waters Act, and the pre-firm subsidies that are in place will continue to be in place, and the easing in of any additional flood insurance cost is over a longer time frame than was initially expected, with the money actually being tied to the actuarial rate. So the good news is that most people are seeing those subsidies stay in place with the changes that he was successful in the Bigger Waters Act. The people who, as their primary residents, are seeing that kind of effect. The secondary residents are not, and that's where you might hear some people who have seen some increases in their flood insurance rates that have been much higher. It is based on primary resident. Ed Stinson has a lot more information on that because that's what he does every day, so I'll turn it over to Ed real fast.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a fact sheet that FEMA put out kind of outlining the reforms to the Bigger Waters Act. We presented that at the Briggs Strong meeting, and with Jennifer's permission, we can send it, maybe put it up on the website so everybody would have access to it, to that fact sheet. And it does outline the changes from the reform to that Bigger Waters.
Mayor, I just want to say, maybe you want to mention the Strategic Planning Committee, who's
Yes.
looking at the planning for resiliency and our rating that really Tim McGuire got off the ground initially, and how we're doing some proactive.
And that's a good point. The discount rate that we presently have can be enhanced, and has already been mentioned by Councilwoman McClay, and as she mentioned, we're on a committee with Councilman Picardi, as well as all of our professionals, emergency management coordinator, city manager, and Jim Rotella, along with members of the public and our planning board officials. I think I mentioned everybody, but the idea is that we're going to have another set of eyes come in to look at our strategic plan and look at our ability to mitigate damage in future storms. So this is another process we're going through that hopefully will result in an even deeper discount in the future with the flood insurance rates.
And in the past, we were receiving the 20% discount. It looks like we might move up a few steps. What was it?
To 25 possibly.
25, okay.
Which I think is the highest you can go. And I think one of the things, the bond ordinance that we had introduced tonight is part and parcel of that process that helps us to mitigate the cost of flood insurance. Okay, so all these things tie in together. That's why we look at them at the strategic planning. One system isn't isolated from the other.
If I could touch on two of the points that were made. With respect to the bond and the amount of the bond, the figures that are in there as our estimated cost, these aren't random figures. These were calculated by our professionals with consideration of the details, and pretty substantial details of the projects, and based on a lot of years of experience in doing that kind of work. So these numbers, they're solid numbers. And as was explained by Mr. Fleischman, you need to make sure you have a cushion. And a bond issue is just an authorization to borrow money, to acquire money. It's not spending. And until you enter into a contract, you haven't spent anything. So, having the numbers that we had now, I think, is more than enough. And really, it's as much as we can possibly expect to have at this point in time, going forward to the second reading and the adoption. The other thing, with respect to the amount of the contracts, the amount of our contracts is, in my experience, almost always included in the resolution of approval. The reason I brought it up tonight with Mr. Rotala's contract was because it was out of the ordinary. It was a bit of an anomaly that we didn't have that number in there. And I think it was satisfactorily explained that, it's an outside funding source, a grant, and it's really the grant that's going to determine the maximum amount that's available under the contract. But if you check retrospectively and prospectively, you'll see that our resolutions awarding contracts do have amounts in them, and all of them have to have a certification of funding. There has to be a funding source identified before we can enter into any contract. So that's already happening.
I think, Mr. Pucci, you wanted to see that number on the agenda, correct? Is there a way we can have that contract amount with the title for each agenda item in the agenda? For example, the contract tonight for Jim Rotella,
Right.
a $30,000 contract, could that be put in the agenda, under the agenda item, the contract amount?
In the title?
Yeah.
Usually it's in the body of the resolution. Could we put it in the title, on the summary, on the agenda sheets?
Or at least look into it.
Like,
I don't think there's any prohibition about that. I mean, if the question is, when you title the resolution, it's a resolution for the hiring of professional services, there would, I don't know of anything that would prohibit the author of the resolution from saying, in an amount not to exceed blank. If that gets you where you need to go, there's no prohibition on that.
Okay. We'll try to work on that.
Okay.
Any comments on the governor's bill, the smoking bill?
Well, I think the 45 days is about to come up. If
Well,
not this week, then next week.
I think
We are,
we're out of order
but-
a little bit here.
Okay.
I think we're supposed to address all of Mr. Pucci's questions.
I was
So-
still on that.
Oh, okay. I
I
thought
wasn't finished.
you were starting to run the meeting. So I think you're going to talk about the smoking bill, I guess.
Yes. As soon as the governor gets that passed, I'm in full support of the smoking bill. And whatever we need to do on our end, if we need to pass it here, we'll pass an ordinance here. But I stand behind that 100% for 100% elimination smoking ban in the city of Brigantine. And all properties, all vehicles, including beach, including the beach, if that's what the governor signs.
Anyone else want to address Mr. Pucci? Okay. Any other public comment? Yes. Jane?
Joan.
Joan, I'm sorry, Joan.
Joan Reese Evans, 1419 Bayshore. At the last meeting, you talked about somebody who got a pay raise of 2%, and it took them above the upper end of the pay scale. And so you altered the pay scale. Now, I've never heard of that being done before, and I've worked for 30 years in America for both the government and private industry. And if you get to the top of the pay scale, and you would, with your raise, go over it, you don't get any more than the top of the pay scale. So I find it rather unusual to think that we alter the pay scale. Are we the only people that do that? And I don't think we should. If you alter the top one up, then you should alter the bottom one up too.
Thank you, Joan. Jennifer, you want to talk about the salary ordinance that you developed?
I didn't actually develop it. It's been in existence here in other municipalities for a long time. From speaking with the personnel director, I guess it was the past manager about 4 years ago, upped all the maximum salaries high so they wouldn't have to adjust the salary ordinance every year. Nothing has been changed over the number of years with the salary ordinance except the construction code official, which we did the last year to give him the 2% raise last year. Some municipalities, depending on how they want to do it, they will increase all the maximum dollar amounts of the salary ordinance, so they are high, so you don't have to adjust it every year. In other municipalities, they want it more transparent, so if anyone gets a raise, they want mayor and council to vote on it, so they have the opportunity to increase the max salaries or not. Now, next year, we would have to increase them at least for those 3 titles again, because the maximum salary now reflects their 2% raises, whereas some of the titles in the other, titles, those maximum salaries are not met yet. We can do it the other way, where we increase all the maximum salaries, let's say next year when we do the salary ordinance, and not have to worry about increasing that at all, which some municipalities, in fact, I think most municipalities do. Having a salary ordinance is something that we have to do as a municipality, and all municipalities have them. How you want to adjust the minimum and maximum salaries is really up to the operations of that municipality.
Jennifer, but for accountability's sake to the public, isn't it a little better to do it more frequently instead of just a large lump so that things could just kind of drift upward? But if it's done on an individual basis, the public is more aware of that?
It would, that's really a decision that's up to the mayor and council of any municipality.
Okay. And just by way of comment, Joan, a long time ago in another life, I was on a salary administration board, and there were a couple of instances where we did that because the incumbent or a person who left a position had been in there a very, very long time, and the person who was coming in, because of their seniority, was just about where they were, where the head of the department was. So to give the person a raise that would be commensurate with the increase of responsibilities, the salary guidelines were altered to allow that to happen. So there would be a record of it moving forward. But that was, certainly not a municipal government. It was a not-for-profit.
Okay. Any other members of council want to can't have a conversation, Joan. Any other members of council want to address Joan? Okay. Point of clarification, Mr. Cerny, I didn't bring the rule book with me. Are members of the public allowed to come up twice under the new set of guidelines?
Speaking to the new guidelines, I don't know that it addressed that at all.
Okay, I'm just trying to
I
remember. I
don't
didn't
know-
bring the resolution with me.
I don't know what the traditional approach has been, but the recent activity did not
Right.
address that.
Traditional approach has been very flexible, and although criticized for that, Mrs. Phillips?
You used to allow people to come up if it was a different
Right.
subject, right?
Yeah, I didn't know whether that had changed under the new set of rules.
No.
So
No,
that's
it
the
didn't, as far as I
clarification.
know. Ann H. Phillips, 308 27th Street. This issue, the salary ordinance and minimum and maximum, has been a subject of discussion in the past, going back a few years. And I think it raises the question of what is the meaning of having a maximum on your salary ordinance when, just as the circumstances that recently occurred, it's going to be raised. In a sense, it's meaningless unless council decides otherwise and sets a new policy. I just think that, well, did council vote on that 2% raise? May I ask a question? I mean, I'll ask it and then I'll sit down.
You can ask it, I can't answer it. All
You're
right,
right,
until you
okay.
finish.
I'll ask it again and then
And
I'll
I'm
sit
not
down.
sure,
But
is she on a new 5 or is she in the banked 5?
New five.
And no
It's-
banking?
No,
Okay,
new
so-
fund. Okay, all
Yeah.
right. That question I have for you, and I think when it came up, I brought it up, I think, at the last council meeting, and it was a surprise to me that it had been done, and I was wondering if it was a surprise to members of council. And I'll ask the question, did council vote on it? If not, why not? And should it be council's policy to do that? And should you look at this policy or revamp the policy concerning minimums and maximums in the salary ordinance? Because at this point, they're essentially meaningless. And somebody reaches the top, they reach the top, or you have to take other steps. But for the public and for your accountability, I think this needs to be reviewed and possibly changed. So I'll sit down now.
Thank you, Mrs. Phillips. Anyone on council want to address that?
Yeah, I'll address it, Ann. We don't specifically vote on anybody's salary, at least the non-represented people. As was explained to us, and as I remembered it, the couple of people who were affected by last meeting's action to amend the salary ordinance had agreed in prior years to take no increase in exchange for an increase in a following year. So when we make an agreement and a deal, I think we should honor it. And the fact that in a couple of cases it took them beyond what was then the stated maximum, you may have a good point in terms of in the salary ordinance, a stated maximum, if it's going to be reached and possibly exceeded, may not be very meaningful, and maybe that's something to take a look at. But for us, the bottom line was that, again, because we don't vote specifically on anybody's salary, you know, what is fair to the person, you know, in the manager's judgment, because the manager's, you know, with the input from the department heads, is the person who, in the first instance, decides, you know, what's an appropriate range or an appropriate compensation for the non-represented people. And in the salary ordinance, as first I'd heard of it, but I don't question it, that in prior years, apparently, the practice by another manager had been to set the number quite high so that you could go for some number of years and still be within that range. I don't know if that's the best policy. But I mean, to me, what matters is, you know, the overall compensation, irrespective of what the salary ordinance may say. If it's appropriate and fair compensation, then the salary ordinance should be kind of the tail and not the dog, if that makes sense.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to talk about the salary ordinance? Okay.
Another topic.
I have seen it both ways, Mrs. Phillips, as you know. The ranges have been put in, and there are times when people reach the top of the range and the salary ordinance has to be adjusted. So the issue that you raise, though, is one of does the public know specifically what someone is making who is non-represented or represented within the city of Brigantine? And clearly the answer is yes. That information is available. You publish it in the newspaper every year. It's available to anyone in the public who wants to find that information. In fact, you can go online and find out what a person's salary is who's working in public employment. So you bring up a good point. And this council will have to address that in terms of the salary ordinance going forward. What the range does do, though, is that the manager hires someone during the year, they can place them within that range, somewhere within that range. And that's normally why the ranges are established for the non-represented employees. The recommendation by the manager for the raises that were given to the non-represented people this year fell within the parameters of the budget. So it is a legal thing that occurred with those increases. But going forward, the salary ordinance is something that will be looked at, I'm sure, and the ranges, as the manager said, reflect in a couple of positions where a person is actually at this particular time. Keeping in mind how long the person has been in the job, too, has a lot to do with where they are on that range. Anyone else want to address?
Mrs. Phillips, if I remember correctly, on that salary ordinance at the last council meeting, there were 3 positions where we had to make that fine adjustment because the prior year, everyone that was non-representative employee in that ordinance took a 0% the prior year and actually took a pay cut because they are now contributing more to their health premiums. So it was fair this time, but we will certainly look into doing something to control the salaries next time that comes up.
Okay, anyone else on the Mrs. Phillips question? Okay, any other public comment? Yes, Mike?
Michael Feely, 314 43rd Street. Just a point of order. I think Mrs. Phillips asked a very specific question that no one answered. Did council vote for the salary increases? And she asked, she stood right here. I just thought someone should answer that for her.
If I
Thank
may
you, Mr.
first, I thought I did, Mike. As I point out, we don't vote specifically on any individuals. We did vote, those of us who voted in favor of it, voted for the amendment to the salary ordinance. And it was after a discussion of, what was in the salary ordinance and what was changing. So, I mean, that was as much as we could have voted for, because again, we don't vote on any given employee's particular compensation. Then I must have misunderstood the question.
I believe, and I'm not absolutely positive, but last meeting when that vote came up, that myself and the mayor voted against the salary ordinance. So there's our answer to that. You asked me if we voted for or against it. I voted against it.
No, Mrs. Phillips, we can't have a conversation. No clarification. Anyone else want to answer whether council voted for the increases?
Mike, I see you're not 100% convinced as to what happened.
Mike,
You're
out of order, Mr. Feely.
What we voted at the last meeting regarding the salary ordinance, the majority council voted to increase the range on, I believe it was 3 different positions. But we did not vote on actually giving raises to individuals.
Mr. Conti.
Jim Conti, 108 North Roosevelt. I didn't make the last meeting, so a salary employee, when I was out working, when our salary employee had a cat, say like $50,000. Then you had the hourly employee. They didn't have a figure, okay? Because they would get the raises and so forth. But where I worked and the company that I worked for, when you had a salary employee, if they made $50,000, that was it. And then what they did was, instead of throwing them a raise, they would give them a bonus. The bonus would be from, well, just hypothetically, from $1,000 to $5,000. And that's how they got their raises. But their job was always for $50,000. And every year, they would decide whether they would get a bonus. And it would be $1,000 to $5,000. The hourly employee got what the contract said. So you wouldn't have to turn around. If you got a salary employee, you wouldn't have to every year or every other year, well, we got to bump it up, we got to bump it up, we got to bump it up. You keep it at one flat figure, you come up with a bonus between say, again, $1,000 to $5,000, and you decide where you're going to give them the bonus. So it's always at $50,000. It'll always be that for the next, God knows how many more years. But then you throw them a bonus in there. The bonus makes up the raise that the hourly employee got. At the company I work for, that's what they used to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone want to address any of the comments that were made by Mr. Conti? Mr. Pucci? I think he's got some time banked.
Mayor and Council, I'm just a little bit confused now. I don't understand what this deal that was made that Councilman DeLucre said. He said a deal was made a couple years ago. Where did deals get made? Do they get made by the council who has the authorization to appropriate the money? That's what I don't understand. I don't know who this person is. I don't know the position. I don't know if they should. I'm not stating if they should or shouldn't have got the raise. I'm just saying this process here. Is somebody in prior years promised a raise a couple years in the future, and through the salary ordinance that isn't necessarily understood that there's raises given through approving a salary ordinance, it just seems hidden. It seems like council didn't approve that deal a couple years ago. I don't know how you can make a deal that Councilman DeLucre said in a couple years we're going to do this for you through a salary ordinance. That's what I don't understand the process. And maybe things should be looked into and done things a little bit different so we understand it better.
I'm going to address it, and I'll ask Jennifer if she has anything to add to it. John, when I'm talking about a deal, we're not talking about some backroom deal or some hidden deal. Each year, the manager is responsible for budgeting for and determining the compensation of the unrepresented employees. That falls within her purview. The represented employees, that's taken care of by their union contracts. We negotiate the contract, and then it's self-effectuating after that. What the manager had done, and what she advised council of before we voted on the salary ordinance, was that for certain of the unrepresented employees, she felt that, you know, it was appropriate for them to get an increase, but not to have that increase hit in calendar year 2013. These employees agreed to that, in exchange for which the increase to which the manager felt they were entitled would hit in 2014. That happened in the case of these couple of positions to necessitate council taking action where otherwise council really wouldn't have played a role, which is to amend the salary ordinance to change the ranges to accommodate the new compensation for these couple of people. The manager each year in setting the budget and council and voting on the budget allocates enough money to cover the salaries and all the other costs of the people employed by the city. The manager has the discretion within the ranges set by the salary ordinance, which is the control that council imposes, but she has the discretion to determine what's the appropriate compensation for people. And she shares that with us. There was no mystery to that, and she explained why in this particular case these couple of people would be moving outside the then established maximum salary for their particular position. And, you know, we heard that, we debated it, and, you know, 5 of us voted that the one thing that was being asked of us, which was kind of a mechanical thing, to change the salary ordinance range to accommodate what our manager thought was appropriate compensation and what was also fair, given the course of dealings that she had had with these people last year and this year. You know, council was asked to vote to do that, and that's what passed. So, did we know that the manager was proposing to increase anybody's salary? Of course we did. That was shared with us. Do we vote on anybody's salary? No, we don't. All we vote on is whether or not to increase the salary range. In the case of these particular positions, had we not done that, then, you know, either they would have gotten no increase or they wouldn't have gotten the full amount of the increase, but that would have been an absolute check on these people getting anything beyond the then stated amount of the salary range.
Anyone else want to address the salary ordinance issue? Michael?
Just a comment on a previous council meeting on July 31st during manager council discussion. It was then brought up for the first time that the 3 positions had been increased. The 3 salaries were being increased, and that the salary ordinance at that point in time was going to have to be changed. However, there was a statement made by the city manager that council approved the increases through the budget approval. It was included in the 2014 budget approval. So council, and I do remember at that point in time a kind of a dazed look on some of the members of council who I don't believe were aware that at that point in time, because of the budget approval, they did ipso facto approve budget or salary increases for not just these 3. I believe off the top of my head there were 8 employees that received 2% increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Can I comment on that, Mayor?
Tony?
Mike, when when we came into the 2014 budget year, the manager actually budgeted for an increase in probably 4 different departments that are not, without contract. And the reason we have to do that is because we have no idea what those contracts will bring to bear. And so we have to budget a certain amount of increase, whether it's used or not. We currently have, or had at that time, we had the fire department is without a contract, the police department is without a contract, the dispatchers are without a contract, the lifeguards are without a contract, and Public Works, all without contracts. So if we did not budget for an increase, and we would not be able to settle those contracts. So that's a function that needs to be done to anticipate that there may be some sort of an increase. Council is looking as a body to keep that increase as low as possible, but nevertheless you have to anticipate for whatever may happen. So we have budgeted, and council did vote on that budget with that percentage increase. I don't recall whatever it was, so that in the event that we settle contracts, the money is budgeted for those contracted departments.
Mike, I want to just emphasize that Councilman Simpson and I voted against the budget as well as the salary ordinance.
I actually do remember a comment being made by the city manager, unless I was Dave, that the budget covered the salary ordinance, but the salary ordinance would have to be dealt with at a later date.
Any other public comment? Yes, Joan.
Just to add to what I already said, when I worked at the FAA, there was a cap on what anybody, the total amount that anybody at the place could earn, and you couldn't go above that amount. And I think at the time it was 1980, and I think at the time that was 40,000. And even the person in charge of the FAA at that time couldn't earn more than 40,000, which I was a little surprised about. So I guess that they must have got the extra at the end of the year, as the other gentleman said, between 1,000 and 5,000 or something like that as a incentive. But I mean, that was a government agency, and that's what I'm trying to say. I've never heard of this.
Thank you, Joan. Actually, I have to tell you that the questions that were asked tonight brought up some very, very important issues that have developed, in my mind, the need for our solicitor to look at developing something where this council does take an affirmative vote on non-represented salary increases going forward, and that should be, if it's going to be a uniform amount that goes across the board to all, it should be an affirmative vote here in the public. And the other issue that has come up is that since we do not have a contract with the city manager, how is the city manager's salary determined going forward? Because the contract would spell that out, what increases is, I'm not sure how that process would work right now. So that has to be an affirmative vote as well from this council. So I'd ask our solicitor if he would at least look at how we would do that going forward. And I appreciate the comments that were made, because I think they were thought-provoking given our form of government and what has transpired with the salary increases this year. Any other comments from council? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to, any other comments from the public? Did anybody else have a hand up? Okay, very good. I'm going to close the public portion. Do we need an executive session? Okay, and I see on the agenda that we include contract negotiations, and I'd also ask that we include the purchase of property with public funds.
Yes, that's part of it
Okay,
as well.
very good. And if you would read the comprehensive resolution that we read to go into executive session.
Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act permits the exclusion of the public from a meeting in certain circumstances, and whereas this public body is of the opinion that such circumstances presently exist, and whereas the governing body wishes to discuss contract negotiations and purchase of property with public funds, minutes will be kept, and once the matter involving the confidentiality of the above no longer requires that confidentiality, then the minutes can be made public. Now therefore be it resolved that the public be excluded from this meeting.
Thank you. Can we have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Are you going to be asking council to take any action?
Not tonight, no.
Okay, so we will not take action when we return. I would anticipate that we'll probably be in there at least a half hour. Okay? Just in case you wanted to stay, but we are not taking action when we return.
Can you just press stop when you do that? We will If you could just press stop, I'll take this.
I agree with you. You and I totally disagree on this. You need to make it. Put it in perspective.